Hello and welcome. This year, I have really wanted to focus on one of the hottest topics in youth baseball, college baseball, obviously professional baseball, and that is arm care. And during my time in Columbus at the ABCA, I was fortunate enough when I was with my son Tyler to run into Ryan Yoshida, owner, creator, Armored Heat, former assistant PT with the world champion LA Dodgers, and really fascinated to hear Tyler's perspective and thoughts on Ryan and Armored Heat. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity for parents, athletes, coaches to hear a little bit of our discussion on arm care. And Ryan, I really want to say thank you. I know this is a busy time of year, both from a family perspective as obviously a business perspective, but thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Walter, and excited to dig in wherever this conversation may go.
Well, I think the best place to start is let's start a little bit about, you're a PT, you're coming out of PT school, and you get started and you're starting within the Dodgers minor league system and then ultimately getting up into the big league level. Talk a little bit about that and your ascent, not only through the Dodgers system, but with regard to being a PT and what it's like in a professional environment and setting.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And that's something I get a lot, especially your first job out of school was with the Dodgers. How did that all work out? And so I'm like, a lot of it is I was in the right place at the right time and just grinded a little bit. But yeah, so I went for physical therapy school. I went to a school in Southern California called Cal State Northridge. And I knew going in that they had it's called a clinical rotation, which is essentially like an internship at the end of your time there. I knew they had that partnership with the Dodgers. So I'm like, well, I knew exactly what I wanted to go do from the get-go. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to go there. And then during your initial years there, you have interviews and it's just to see who gets that role. And luckily enough, I got it. And then kind of fast forward to the end of the time there was 2017. And went out there. It's just like an 8-week spring training thing in Arizona where spring training's held. And so I did it, loved it. I was with the major league team there, we're literally just doing any of the runt work that just needs to get done. Spring training's a grind. So it's like, you got to fill up the water coolers, get them to all the fields, make sure everything's done, do a little hands-on here and there. And so loved it. Never felt like it was fun. I was around, I think that org does probably the best job of hiring the smartest people in the game at all facets of it. And so I was learning so much just trying to be a sponge there. So did it for 8 weeks and then went back and I was about an hour or so from the ballpark and had maybe 3 or 4 months of school left. And so I'm like, well, I got a couple classes, but I'm way more interested in this. So I went and asked the head trainer at the time, Neil Ramp. I'm like, hey, Neil, can I just keep showing up for free? I'm loving it. I'm learning a lot. It's fun. And so I'll show up to the home night games and then obviously do school during the day and did that. So it was great. Did that throughout the 17th season, and then everything kind of worked out at the end, and got to the point where they're like, "Hey, we're opening up a role in Arizona, which is going to be kind of that entry level minor league physical therapist position." So I'm like, "I'm in." My wife and I, we just got married. We moved out to Arizona. I'm like, "This is awesome. Loved it. It's kind of my dream job from the get go." But in my head, I'm like, "Oh, you got to go work in the clinic, learn a bunch of stuff, screw up enough stuff, and then kind of be ready for the game." And luckily enough, was in the right spot at the right time and got that position. So started there for a couple of years. And then that was drinking out of a fire hose and messing stuff up and then trying, don't do that again. We learned that the hard way. And then was promoted to a position called a minor league rehab performance coordinator, which was kind of overseeing all the rehabs at the minor league level and trying to be that quarterback that's working with the performance staff, the pitching staff, pitching coach staff as well. And then kind of fast forward in the last couple of years there, I was the major league assistant rehab coordinator there. And mainly kind of what my niche was with the longer term rehab guys that would stay out in Arizona for longer term rehabs, what usually surgical procedures. So that was kind of my time there. Like I said, just learned as much as I can, not just from our and like the medical staff side of things, but I think just as much, if not more, from the strength conditioning performance staff. Was just learned a ton, and I'm so thankful for it. The pitching side of things, the R&D side of things, I would try to just hop in every one of those meetings and learn as much as I could. So it was great, surrounded by great people, and wouldn't trade it for anything.
What kind of got you started or interested with regard to starting Armored Heat? I mean, now it's a pretty recognized. Everywhere you go, you see the logo. I see kids that have, whether it's a T-shirt. I know Tyler talks about Armored Heat, where a lot of guys, seek out your guidance. What was kind of the foundation and kind of the epiphany? Like, hey, I'm going to start this arm care type of company, Armored Heat, and really see if I can give it a go. What was the emphasis in the start in your mind in 2023?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say I was lying if I said I had these big grand visions that are kind of what it is today. But what the initial idea for it was just, it was honestly more of frustration than anything. I was see what guys were doing for arm care and just looking at baseball as a whole, taking a step back. It's like pitching side of things, cutting edge, really progressing at a rapid pace. I think strength conditioning side, we're getting very baseball specific across the game, doing a really good job there. We can do that all the way across the game, but for whatever reason, what guys were doing for their standard arm care was the one thing that I thought was kind of stuck in the Stone Age. I mean, we had our players were doing the same programs our pitching coaches had done 15, 20 years ago. You had your Ys, Ts, Is, ER, IR, and it was either bands, weights, or manuals, which is like a manual resisted exercise by a staff member. And so that was kind of the gist across baseball. So there's nothing wrong with it. I think that was just the norm of the progression of how things were happening. But the part in my head that just didn't add up was then I would compare that with a rehab process. And then I'm thinking about like, well, why the heck are we waiting until guys are already hurt and in the rehab process till we actually put together what I would call as a higher quality arm care program that actually has progression and variation built into it so they can keep progressing versus kind of hit the plateau. And then you've probably seen a bunch of guys with arm care and you just kind of start going through the motions. So after seeing a lot of good results on health and performance side, I'm like, okay, well, nothing genius about it, but I think that this would be something that was best applied on the front end of things. And so that was kind of the initial story or idea that kicked it off. And just like any other business, I think there was a lot of this throughout the way. I'm like, okay, how exactly are we going to get this rolling? But that was the genesis story of it.
For those that are curious, I want to interject, not just getting a start with the Dodgers, but today, as of 2026, you would say you work with approximately 150-ish type of college programs. So talk a little bit about where you are right now with the type of organizations that you work with.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's kind of a split business in who we're serving and working with most. And so one of those would be directly to the teams. So that's kind of zeroed in, primarily grew really fast at the college level. I think just the ability to fit in. And it's a very we stay in our lane of expertise. Like we know exactly what we're good at, which is the arm care side of things. We get the heck out of the way for what everyone else is good at, what they're at. It's the strength conditioning. You still go do your lifts. Pitching side of things, you guys take care of that. We're just kind of that plug and play arm care program that has those progressions in it. So yeah, to your point, it's about 160 college teams we're working with across all the different levels. And then just recently, this last year, I've started working with some high school teams, which has been really exciting because I think it's just a fresher ball of clay to work with there. And so that's about, we're at 30 teams or so, just getting that off the ground this last year, but it's been fun to see and have new hurdles there with the younger athletes. And then, on the individual side of things, we also work with a lot of pro guys, probably 200 plus pro guys. And then some agencies are just kind of getting it for all of their guys. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and it's been fun because I kind of get to keep my thumb on the pulse on what's new at all the different levels. And so it's been something that's really, really fun for me. And it's something I can really enjoy.
Now let's really start off with the elephant in the room is, a lot of parents and student athletes, particularly I call it that post Little League time period where they're graduating from the smaller fields and getting into the bigger diamonds. What are some of the mistakes that families, youth coaches, or even younger athletes make when it comes to arm care, as far as the implementation or, when should they be considering starting arm care? And more importantly, it's not just for pitchers. So when you're younger, you might have a guy that's an infielder who pitches, maybe a catcher who pitches. So what are some of the early mistakes that some youth coaches or families make with regard to arm care that they might want to implement, in that 13 to 15-year-old time period?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think probably the best way to explain my rationale on it is to take a step back and I guess define what arm care is and what it fits in, because I think that's initially where there's a lot of confusion. And at least again, a lot of this is my own thoughts and how I think about it. But when you really boil down like the player development on the arm side of things, like you have three big pillars, and I'll speak specifically to pitchers for this, but you have one would be the strength conditioning program, which is like your total body lifting, in simplified terms, just getting all your big prime movers stronger, pending the age, and just increasing the total horsepower. And then the other second pillar would be the pitching or throwing side of things, which obviously skilled instruction is huge, and teaching these guys how to pitch correctly, being able to program correctly, and being able to moderate workloads correctly. That's huge, especially at the young age. So that would be kind of the pitching side of things. And that final pillar would be what I would call the arm care pillar, which I would guess distill that down into specific strengthening, mobility, and recovery work directly dictated to the throwing arm. That's designed to piggyback both of those first two pillars, not take the place of them, but really just be a nice add-on to both those, or supplement, or kind of bridge the gap to those. So I guess that would be at least my initial explanation of where I would explain, define arm care. And then I would say some different things that I've seen that can be improved would be, one is waiting too long to start a program. Now, when you think of arm care, like there's definitely scaled versions of it. Like it can be as simple as a young athlete just having some cans of soup and holding them out in a T position, because that may be quote unquote a slight overload to their musculature, and still provide strengthening. But I think the key thing is most people think, oh, arm care, that's for when I get to the college level, pro level, even high school level. But I think there's ways to scale it at a young age. And at the young age, it doesn't have to be something super complex. It can be something very easy. Like, hey, your lifts is probably going to be some body weight lifts, depending on the age. Just do some push-ups, do some pulls, and do some lower body, and doesn't be anything crazy. And then your arm care can be, I mean, it may start out with bands and may progress on to different weighted exercise. But I think a huge thing is start earlier than you think, in terms of building that workload. And then I guess the reason behind that, just to throw everything out there, it's in my mind, is the big elephant in the room is velocity. Like,
right.
Guys, no matter if people love it, hate it, whatever, like kids are throwing harder at younger ages, and that is what it is. We're not going to change that. You're not going to purposely tell guys to throw slower. And so now it's like, okay, well, instead of just throwing rocks at velocity and saying it's terrible, it's like, okay, well, let's scoot back a little bit. How can we best prepare this arm to handle those increased stresses at a younger age? And some of them, it may be, hey, if we can put them on a really good arm care program at an early age, and now we've kind of made the arm a little more resilient to those injuries. And some of them, like bony issues, if you want to go down that route, like no matter what arm care, how much you do, it's like there are going to be some growth plates that you can't strengthen the strength of those. So that's going to be definitely more on the workload bucket, which essentially means just making sure you're throwing the right amount, the right intensities all throughout a year, and dosing that in correctly. So sorry to get a little off track.
No, that's perfect. And one of the tie-ins that I want to kind of graduate to is that 15 to 19, those high school years, especially when we start to consider that a lot of young athletes now are pulled or torn between the travel world and the high school world. When they're younger, that's more just skewed towards the travel world.
Yeah.
But as they get into that 15 to 19-year-old, they got the travel and they have the high school. And sometimes it's a blurred line there. And you have athletes that are throwing 2 and in some cases 3 times a week. And this is where I try to get parents, and I would love for you to share. Now we're growing internally. There's a lot of, as you have just alluded to, growth plates, ligaments, tendons, a lot of internal growth. Our strength training ramps up significantly, and our workload increases substantially for that 15 to 19-year-old athlete. We begin to worry about college recruiting. So I'd love for you to kind of share like a day in the life of a high school caliber athlete, baseball athlete. talking about, okay, there's an in season, an off season. What can athletes be doing in this time of the year in the spring to kind of keep a keen eye on, okay, I have to do my arm care. I have to maintain some semblance of strength training, all the while trying to make sure I keep my arm fresh. Can you talk a little bit about some warning signs, some key routines that they can do to make sure that their arm stays healthy throughout this spring and then into the summer season?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm trying to think on how I want to lay this out. But so to answer the first piece or address the first piece of that would be essentially like you talked about the different teams they're playing on or throwing,
Right.
or how it's scheduled out throughout the year. And I think and anyone would be BSing you if they say, oh, this is the one black and white, you need to do this and not do that. Or even at the big league level, like some guys, it used to be, hey, we deload for 6 weeks. We don't pick up ball till December. Now you talk to a lot of them, it's like, oh, X group of people, they're like, hey, we keep our arm moving, but at a much lower intensity. And another guy say, no, some other guys may, no, I still like to deload for 4 to 6 weeks. And both of those cohorts, you can see having really good benefits on performance and health side of things. So I don't think that there's a one way or the other there. I will say, and this is at almost all ages, is that the competitive throwing is the thing that I personally don't believe should be happening year round. Like you need to have, and people hear the word deload and understand it or perceive it differently. Like a deload, if you have a deload in the off season, this could be for some people, maybe like to the point earlier, not throw at all. Like I know we had a bunch of relief pitchers, like you have guys play catch, and there's some of those guys, it's pedal to the metal or nothing. And so they're the ones asking, can I just keep throwing year round? It's like that for you is probably not the best idea because you don't have that throttle that can dial it back in the off season. And then you have other people on the other side that just like they can lose range of motion really fast, or they just like keeping their arm moving and they can throw at a very sub-maximal intensity. Whereas those people, that may be a very good fit. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. But the one thing that I'm pretty firm on stance with is I don't think there's a need or there's any benefit and probably has negative outcomes on throwing competitively year round. And so you can kind of person by person, you can schedule that quote unquote deload or off season wherever you want through the year based on what's most important. But there needs to be some time frame, especially with these younger athletes, where they're not pitching competitively. So that'd be my stance on that. And then there's a second question, but I got down that.
Well, just trying to keep the younger athletes as they're transitioning into high school, and being cognizant of, okay, you're going to have a pretty aggressive spring that's going to lead into a pretty aggressive summer. So in season, what are some arm care, maybe some drills that they can do, or is there a way for them to monitor, is my arm getting fatigued? Am I getting tired? Do I need to throttle back for a week? Or, something about this time of year where they're all trying to come out of the gate blasting, and how that can't possibly last into August if we're starting, right out of the gate in February and March.
Yeah. So initial standpoint, and I think this is the thing that's screwed up at all levels, not just youth. Like college levels happens all the time, especially both the college and pro levels. That time right before spring training, right before guys report for college, for the start of spring for college, like there's not a lot of interaction with the coaching staff during that point. And so the most important part for like those first 4 to 6 to 8 weeks of the season is what they've done in those previous 8 weeks and how they built up. Because the one thing that with all the mixed research out there, to simplify, the one thing that like nobody is arguing, it can't really be argued based on what's out there, is like the one thing you don't want is for whatever that athlete's baseline. So they would call like a chronic acute or their chronic workload, whatever their athlete's baseline is, you don't want a huge spike from that, because that's going to put them in the worst spot and make injury the highest risk there. So that can happen two ways. That could be, oh, maybe my bullpens were not truly maximal intensity, or I wasn't throwing enough of them leading up to the season. Any of those factors that would keep this line low, that chronic workload low, or any factor where that onboarding process or that ramp up is far too steep or far too fast. I would say both of those are kind of, it's a reverse equation. So either of those can affect the other one. It's just the relationship between the two. But having too steep of an on ramp from what your workload is, from what your foundation is what's going to put guys in the worst spot, and why, depending on the research you're looking at, about almost 50% of the injuries will happen, at least at the pro level, in those first 2 to 3 months of the season. And so in terms of like what to look at, it's almost zoom out and look at what they did before to prep their arm for it. And then in terms of what to do through the season, just like anything else, I think I'd be BSing to say, like, hey, there's one magic exercise that's going to protect your arm. That's not how it works. You need to have a foundation. You need to keep that going, not deload from it, because if you stop it and then you add it back in, that's going to be, again, adding in that spike in the workload. So kind of staying consistent with your work, the boring answer, but staying on a consistent program with it. And then the things that I've seen and talking with people that I think is common is there are some things like pitchers, baseball players, you're not going to feel 100% all the time at any level, no matter what you play at. But it's knowing, whether the athlete or parent or coach, knowing, okay, which of these are our yellow flags? Like, hey, yeah, you should be sore there between your scapulas after throwing. Your lat can be a little sore after throwing. That's fine. What are kind of the areas to be a little more quick on the trigger finger without panicking, but just to give the athlete a blow? And especially at those younger levels, the ones that we talk about that are the ones that can kind of have a lot of smoke before they happen is those growth plate based issues. So common one for youth pitchers is one at the elbow, one at the shoulder. So that inside elbow bone, if you feel the inside of your elbow bone, if you feel discomfort on that bone, that's typically it can be bony or that tendon inserting, the forearm tendon inserting. Either way, those are the ones that you want to tread a little more cautiously with and power through. And then shoulder, it's a little more vague, but it runs through shaft of the humeral head. And so it's like guys will feel things through here. That one's a little less specific. Elbow's very specific. But those are the ones where I would say are ones, hey, these are ones to listen to with a lot of respect, whereas certain musculature, like the common ones would be, like I said, lat, rhomboids, those muscles between your scabs, even cuff, like back of the shoulder, like that should be sore after you just decelled your arm however many pitches you threw at max intensity. That's normal. Now it's let your body recover, and then you kind of have that stepping stone to build strength there.
You know, one of the questions that I get an awful lot, especially from the high school age pitchers, is the tricep and the bicep, especially as they go into that 16 to 17, they have some tricep soreness, but a lot of it is bicep soreness. Can you talk a little bit about, I don't think we talk enough about the role of the bicep and the tricep as it comes to throwing. We talk shoulders, we talk elbows and forearms and wrists, but talk a little bit about the need to strengthen the arm in total, and what that might be a sign of is if, you're starting to throw a little bit harder, your triceps starting to, get a little bit more engaged and involved. And then those guys that try to carry and they, that wrist gets away and the bicep tendon. Talk a little bit about that soreness, particularly in high school, and what that may be a signal of. Yeah,
no, great question, and something you see at definitely at that level and even at higher levels. And so roles of each of them, I guess, are the best. And then the part I wanted to address, like when I would be looking at mechanical side of things, as a physical therapist, I always like having the pitching coach with me. Hey, that's your side of things. We can speak the same language. I'm able to speak the same language of them, but I'd rather them be the person doing any of the analysis or anything on the delivery or mechanical side of things. And then in terms of the biceps and triceps, so basic roles for it is the tricep is an acceleratory muscle. Debate on how much actually acceleration is coming from that, and some of it just from the force of the rotation happening below or prior to that. And then the biceps is the one that's probably more commonly gets sore, and that's going to be the thing that decelerates all of that elbow extension that happens during the throw. So right around ball release. And so that one I see a lot more common. And then there's a second argued upon role. I don't want to say argued upon, debatable role, which I think makes a lot of sense. I don't know that there's black and white proof, just like everything else in research right now.
Right.
But having both of those co-contracting, meaning like contracting at the same time. If you think about it at the elbow, if they're both pulling down hard, it's essentially like strapping down your elbow and connect as a protective mechanism as well to the elbow. So that's a thought that's out there. Again, not proven correct or the end all be all, but it's something like, hey, if you think about it, it definitely makes sense. But yeah, in terms of the biceps, deceleration, something that happens. Usually when you look at that, it's the same answer as before. You want to two different things. You want to backtrack and be like, has there been a big spike in the workload? Because usually that, like, this is one of your typical spring training, start of season, guys come in, even if you're like throwing a quote unquote max intensity bullpen back home indoors. It's like when you get in there, you're in live BPs, like, or starting games, like whether you're even your perceived highest intensity will still have bumps or jumps in it, moving, having a hitter stand in or being in front of a crowd. And so those are some of the things that lead to it having an increase in the workload. And then another one, to your point, is like younger age especially, is like increased velocities now also affect that same equation. It's like you have a jump in your velocity. Now that's a higher amount of elbow extension speed that needs to be slowed down. And so that can be a huge factor as well. So the training needs to be kind of multivariable. Some of it can happen building the volume while throwing. I think that's as important as anything. You can now, depending on whether in a throwing schedule, you can kind of start dosing that in the weight room. We're doing some eccentric work on the biceps, just making sure they have the horsepower to handle it, and put them in a better spot. And so those would be the at least the main things on the bicep side of things. And then the tricep side of things, I think this is one of the more misunderstood portions of the throwing arm. A lot of people is like bicep, yes, it's very clearly biceps brachialis, the muscle, the elbow flexor muscle group that's getting sore. Now with the tricep, which is the muscle that runs down back of the arm, attaches to the back of the elbow, that's the one where a lot of people that don't have a lot of experience, or maybe not the medical background, think like, oh, it's everything that every time you feel pain in the back of the elbow or down here, it's triceps. And that's the thing. Probably if I had to put like a gut number on that, well, there's two different mechanisms why you can have that discomfort kind of near that tricep insertion point. One of them would be like a tricep tendonitis, by far the lesser of what you see in throwers. But a very common one you see is what's called a posterior elbow impingement. There's different various names for it, but it's essentially at that elbow extension, the back of the bone hitting on bone. And so that's a lot of times what gets irritated. So that would not be tricep doing as much tricep work or trying to fix triceps, never going to fix that, even though that's, I'd say probably 80% of the time guys are having back the elbow pain, that's the driver, not the triceps. And so there's definitely two buckets there. So the one misunderstood thing is make sure you have the correct diagnosis, or you're going to be doing the complete wrong thing to address it. But yeah, usually just to simplify it, there's far deeper versions of it. Simplify is like if you just softly bounce into elbow extension, relaxed, and you feel it, your triceps not activating. So that's definitely trending towards the bone, hitting the bone. Whereas if you're like mid-range and pressing out into an elbow extension, and it bothers it, that's probably going to be more towards the triceps tendon. So probably an oversimplified explanation, but that's at least the gist of it.
Well, I mean, a lot of young athletes, when I talk about that transitionary phase, when they're coming out of the 14, 15-year-old, they're getting into the sophomore, the junior, they're starting to think about college recruiting. I have to have velo. And, you know, that they skip the traditional progression phase and they're trying to blast off. And so that would lead me into the word progression. I really very rarely hear a lot of the pitching world really getting younger athletes to understand that progression, that, you know, that ramp up. In college and pro ball, there's a real concerted effort. You know, 1 inning leads to 2, that leads to 3. But in high school, typically, or summer travel, we blast right into the 5, 6, 7 innings right out of the gate. And we wear it as a badge of, you know, like I have a rubber arm. But can you talk about the need to kind of understand the word and the emphasis on the word progression to get the arm to a point where you can ask it to go from 0 to 80 or 90 in a 1 to, say, 7 week time period? I mean, you have to have some kind of takeoff time period or ramp up period. Can you explain the value of that?
Yeah, no, exactly. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think that's something that is very poorly done, and in some cases at the high school and youth level. And to your point, it's like professional baseball and college baseball do a really good job of having a very drawn out and planned progression. And I guess the underlying rationale for it is essentially what we just talked about, was the ability to not have that huge spike in workload.
Right.
So it's virtually impossible to go from the offseason to throwing 6 throwing whatever 5-6 innings and not have a spike. So it's like, okay, now how can we smooth out this? But we still want to get to that highest peak. How can we smooth out how we're getting to the highest peak? And so a very good way to do it, there's so much different tech now you can use, whether it's any monitoring around your arm, whether it's using velocities, pitch counts, so many different ways. But whatever the goal of whatever method you're using is to smooth out that process. So it may be like a general offseason to go all the way from the get-go is like guys will start their offseason and maybe you're throwing 3 or 4 times a week with days off in between. And then you're progressing to throwing every day. And then you're building out to long toss. And then you're making sure you hit your pull downs if you're a pull down guy. And then you're stepping on a mound to throw bullpens. I don't think a lot of people realize, hey, a lot of these big league guys, they've thrown 10 to 12 bullpens before they even show up to camp. Right. And then from there, they're throwing another pen, then they're getting a couple of live BPs, and then finally they're getting into a game and without 1 or 2 innings, to your point. And so not to say that that's the end all be all. Obviously, injuries are very high there. I think there's a huge argument to be made. Forces are a lot higher. They're playing with the very finest cutting edge of we're pushing the human body as far as you humanly can. But I think that's something where as much as you can smooth out that ramp, you're in a better spot. So to your point, whether it's 6 weeks, I don't think any less than 4 weeks makes a ton of sense to be fully built up as a starter. But yeah, like that 6 week mark on, hey, you can go by pitches, innings, if you can get somewhat consistent number of pitches per innings based on the level. But however it is, you're just trying to make a staircase to get you to that final peak, to put it in as simple frame as possible.
So I know a lot of parents and a lot of athletes. I mean, they're familiar with Armored Heat. They want to know how to work with Armored Heat. Is it reach out to you directly via the website? Let's talk a little bit about access, because parents really want access. They're going to want now. When I want parents to understand, when I walked through the ABCA, this year was in Columbus. I can tell you I lost count after 20. The amount of people that Ryan runs into that are either former major leaguers, current major leaguers, they all know Yoshi. They all are saying, hey, Rye, what's going on? So you definitely have a full schedule. But if there's people out there that want to work with Armored Heat, and particularly you, how are they going to reach out to you and get engagement with the app and get their athletes signed up and on board?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And something I had to, with zero business experience in my entire life, I had to figure out how the heck we're going to do it. And so to your point, it's like, I'm like, well, this is be beneficial for baseball players across the country, across the world. We have a lot of international guys using it. And so it's something where it's like, okay, how can we make this able to be digestible, used, and provide maximum value to players and parents? And so the app was definitely the way we decided to go. And so what we've done is essentially based off that initial premise is build out an app with a program that runs in 2-week blocks. So every 2 weeks, you get a brand new block, new exercises, new progressions, and it keeps building with the athlete. And then inside each of those blocks, we kind of wanted to cover both sides. So there's a pre-throw and activation side of things, which you should pair with your normal warm-up. And before you do any drill work or throwing, that's kind of the fit there, because pre-throw is just as important as post-throw in many cases on the activation side. And then we also take care of the post-throw side of things, which is more of that strength, mobility, recovery programs we talk about. And we have 3 different programs that can line up with exactly what the athlete's throwing schedule it is. So essentially we boil it down to, is it your high day of throwing? Is it your medium day of throwing? Or is it your low day of throwing? And on your high, we have a program that's more strengthening based for post-throw called our Full Armor program. Reasoning for that is so that the day that's your low, likely in an ideal word comes after that. Now we have our recovery mobility program, which is exactly the opposite. There's zero strengthening there because we just truly value that recovery day or recovery time. But it's a great day to hit some of the soft tissue work and recovery work on those muscles that'll get tight or sore after a start or throughout the course of the season. And then we have a program called SCAP Emphasis Program, just to get sniper specific with their SCAP work on a medium day. So that's how it's all drawn up for these athletes, and try to make it as spoon fed as possible. So it's very simplified, actionable for guys. And then, at our website, www.armoredheat.com, we have different packages based on what fits you guys best, whether it's a monthly or an annual. But we're happy to work with athletes however works best for them, and it's been cool to see it grow and just seeing. I think that to the point earlier is like younger athletes are a fresher ball of clay to work with. So as much as like I will never make velocity or performance claims, I don't think that's our role in the baseball world. So our mission is arm health. But the fact that, hey, how do you improve arm health? And it's with improving arm strength, proper mobility, and proper recovery. Well, an indirect output of that, and at some times, is also performance side of things. So it's cool to see, especially with the younger athletes, seeing those improvements. But yeah,
I think it's important to get parents to understand that Ryan's working with college teams, college coaches, pro athletes, but at the end of the day, all athletes need arm care. And so Armored Heat is going to allow you, on a in-season, off-season, and let's eliminate the whole velocity. Like that is a byproduct, as Ryan just said, of health and progression. Ultimately, it's no different than foot speed. And I would love for you to talk a little bit before we close and wrap up. Velocity is a byproduct of two things. One, health, obviously, and two, strength, but it's a measurable. It's no different than whether your foot speed metric, maybe a strength metric, like how much can you lift, how much can you squat, et cetera. But there has to be a foundation by which to build off of or onto, and that strength allows the arm to kind of gradually be able to handle more, and thus you begin to throw harder, but more efficiently. So you're really helping athletes monitor and maintain their growth as they get older within the sport.
Yeah, no, for sure. And by explaining it that way, you bring up a thought, and I don't know if it was one of the top surgeons across baseball. I don't know if it was Meister, Elitrush, or who, but they would explain it as it's a Corvette engine and a Pinto body, and like those are the guys, like those are the ones. Hey, if they have the engine, we need to really dial up how resilient, how strong we can make the body to handle that, because those are always like going through all the draft process and trying to attribute risks to guys. Like those are always the ones, like that combo mixed with prior injury are always the scary, because like as much as everyone tries to say, oh, we can predict injuries, this is the rash, like you can't attribute it to one thing. The one thing that I think is black and white is the number one indicator of future injury is previous injury. So like if you go off that, and then that second aspect of a Corvette and a Pinto body, or just a body that's not ready to handle the demands, at least over the course of a full season, of that horsepower, it's something that is a slippery slope. So, well,
I want to let parents know that we're going to have all of Armored Heat's contact. Ryan's information will be both in the podcast and in the YouTube, and all of the reels will have the access to Armored Heat, which is access to Ryan. Again, he works with individuals, he works with teams, he works with coaches. I think it's a wonderful resource, no matter where you are within your baseball journey, whether you're a pitcher, a catcher, an outfielder. Arm care is an integral part. And even, I always try to tell parents, you're getting into that 12-year-old, 13-year-old, that's kind of the time where you want to begin to learn about the body and the signals that the body gives. And you really want to have some sort of a foundational arm care program, not a velocity program. There's a huge difference. And I really hope that parents take advantage of it. And Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. And I look forward to running into you, hopefully above and beyond the ABCA every year.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thanks for having me, Walter. It was a blast.